Hi. Systems thinking is a powerful approach to thinking about problems and influences. We use it in root cause analysis and understanding everything from market segments through to biological systems, even in Freudian psychotherapy. But what if we were to get weird for a moment and apply systems thinking to time? Welcome back to Brainwave52, where today we're getting short, sharp, and sharing how systems thinking can breathe new life into innovation. Talking about innovation, we often find ourselves naturally thinking about the future. But of course, the past and the present are just as important, thinking about what has changed, what is changing, and what will change. But what if we took the causality out of this and treated each time period as its own part of a system? Quick disclaimer, as we move forward, we're going to simplify things a little just to get the thinking across, but also so you don't have to spend the next 2 hours listening to me. Let's dig in. Let's start with a retrospective. We'll initialize our system with a simple causal chain. The pandemic happens, people start to shift to remote work, the idea being that once the pandemic declines, everyone goes back to the office. Now let's remove the time causality and see what this looks like as a system. So, the pandemic happened, and in an effort to continue operations, everyone who could shifted to working remotely. This is where our first feedback loop comes into play, in that working from home means less contact with others, and it should speed up the decline of the pandemic. Now, of course, this is a non-linear system, meaning there are external factors that are also influencing this cycle. Things like social justice movements, political unrest, and vaccine rejectionism that will group into the broad umbrella of social unrest. So let's put in a system delay to acknowledge that it's going to take some time for the remote work to have an impact on the pandemic's decline, which eventually it does to an extent. Now, the pandemic declining means that people should be heading back to the office. The idea being that as people head back to the office, this will spark their need for connection and a location change, and it should cause a decline in remote work. The unintended consequence, though, was that as people returned to the office, they realized more and more the advantage of being able to work remotely and wanted to keep that situation more permanent. We can start to see now how the system gets complicated, but let's take this a step further. The power of making the passage of time a system is twofold. You can zoom out of what you may think is direct causality, and as a result, you can play with the flow direction of the system and experiment to see what happens. Let's start with the future lever this time and move it so that it's now people happily working in the office. We're going to extract some insights from our previous stage and say that to feed into people working in the office, they have to want remote work less. This then leads to the intermediate stage of less people working remotely, which leads to more people working back to the office. Now, for people to want to go back to the office, there also have to be less benefits to working remotely. Do you notice anything missing? In order to achieve this system, we had to remove the social unrest element. Let's take this one step further. What if we change another lever so that the pandemic never happens? We can follow a similar line of thinking here and come to the conclusion that remote work takes a lot longer to even become a significant factor, let alone the norm. Social unrest still happens and still leads to phenomena like quiet quitting, but because there isn't as much investment being poured into things like remote meeting tools and AI, it's a much more gradual process that may not ever be fully realized. As we compare the two systems, we see that the root cause emerging was actually the social unrest. So actually what we uncover is that the pandemic wasn't so much of a factor in people favoring remote working as social injustice. Remote work allowed people to escape lengthy commutes, which disproportionately affected marginalized communities. It's also given a voice to those who felt unheard in previous office settings. The ability to work remotely, free of office politics, was empowering. The power of systems thinking applied to innovation is that we remove the bias of time and look at complexity instead. Now we know that if we want people to return to the office full time, We need to address the social unrest system. This might mean decentralizing offices into more satellite spaces to reduce those lengthy commutes. It means shifting the culture of meetings to give agendas and speaking roles in advance so that quieter folks have the opportunity to better prepare rather than being put on the spot and wanting to contribute there and then. In trying to innovate using systems thinking, we bring out root causes that we might not have seen much earlier because of a time bias, allowing us to think beyond just the causal passage of time. And because we're sharing short and sharp, that is all the time we have in this episode of Brainwave 52. If innovation sounds like a conversation you'd like to have, please reach out. Otherwise, stay tuned for our next episode where we visit the world of the Curio's Mind practice. Bye.